Who are the heroes at the Flint Water Crisis, in your mind?
Well, like there's been like a lot of accolades. So I'm gonna list like the people who are just like on the ground like this whole time. Because now
When you say whole time, are you going back 2011? I mean, when did this whole time start for you in your mind's eye? When did this start?
well, I'll say like the people who are just like out there since the switch and the people that I know about, because there are people who like during this since the switch in April 2014 who were going down to city council and complaining and trying to get help, like as their hair was falling out, and as they were getting rashes and they really didn't know the cause and all of that stuff. So I would say, and people who got active and involved. So Tony Palladino, and he's been around for a while and was a fighter even before this whole, in the context of the water crisis, but he was very active and out in the streets and marching and that stuff. Um, Councilman Eric Mays, who now he is currently in jail.
Yeah, he's in jail, and they don't give him bottled water in jail, I hear.
Yeah, they don't give him bottled water, and right now they're not allowing him to be released to attend city council. And he was given, like, really it's because he fought against the emergency manager law and against emergency managers, because there was another man in Benton Harbor, Reverend Edward Pinkney, who fought against the emergency manager in Whirlpool. And I attended his sentencing, and now he's serving 2.5 to 10 years because he was trying to recall the mayor in Benton Harbor, and the mayor in Benton Harbor was in bed with the emergency manager in Whirlpool Corporation. But he doesn't live in Flint, but I just wanted to give him a shout out, Reverend Pinkney, a shout out. And Reverend Pinkney was been a fighter against the emergency manager law too. But the people in Flint, I'm not sure like who Melissa named, but like the people who are involved with her, like Tanya Williams and Jessica Owens, and Melissa's husband Adam Mays, who does like a lot of the memes and the design and maintains like their website with the Democracy Defense League. We have Bishop Bernadelle Jefferson, who's actually on the
I just switched to
okay.
city council meeting so we can see Eric Mays. You want to see Eric Mays? This is a city council meeting from a year ago, January the 26th, where the residents are coming up and talking to city council, and emergency manager is sitting next to them in the audience, and they're explaining the situation. So I thought I would just show this on the screen as you list off the heroes. So this is Eric Mays at City Council a year ago. So there's no audio. It's just going to roll as you talk over the top of him.
Okay. And so we also have Bishop Bernadelle Jefferson and City Councilman Scott Kincaid and Mott Community College professor Paul Jordan. And the reason I'm mentioning all three of those is because they are on the federal lawsuit challenging the emergency manager law. So this law has been challenged since its implementation. So there was a state lawsuit, and that kind of went away because we ended up repealing the law, and now there's a federal lawsuit. And so now that is in federal appeals court. So there are a lot of these people who are fighting in the courtrooms. There's Judge Valdemar Washington, who is representing the city of Flint in a class action lawsuit challenging the water rates. And that's how the Democracy Defense League got into this whole water fight, is because there were people without water. There were apartment complexes that were without water and being condemned and kicked out of their homes because the owners weren't paying the water bills, and people were Darnell Early had hired had hired 2 special investigators to prosecute people for quote unquote stealing water, as this water is one of the highest in the nations and making people sick. And so we formed an emergency water relief site to have a space where people can get water, where people whose water was shut off and didn't have necessary access to water, where they can get water. So, and I don't know if I mentioned Jessica Owens and Tanya Williams, who I met just basically like at marches and protests. We have Alec Gibbs, who is also an attorney, and he represents like the Flint and retirees, and so like getting some of the legal stuff and some of the larger geopolitical implications of the emergency manager law. I know I'm probably missing some folks, and then there's the people. Oh, the clergy. I totally forgot about the clergy. So the clergy has been an integral part in this fight, because we don't have like a whole lot of space for people to meet in Flint, and especially like places that you can meet for free. So the clergy, the concerned pastors for social action under the president, Reverend Al Harris, they like last year, probably about last year around January, February, they formed a committee to really deal with the water crisis, because they had parishioners who were, who were having issues, and so they wanted to be involved in this fight. And so we all kind of came together because we were dissatisfied with what the the city was doing, and so we ended up forming a coalition for clean water. And like Kurt Guyette, who we've already known. I mean, I've known Kurt for a while because he's an ACLU investigative journalist, and we knew him. The Democracy Defense League knew him because he was hired and came up to Flint because Alec Gibbs and myself were on the board of our local branch of the ACLU. And Alec Gibbs is an ACLU cooperative attorney. So he came up to meet us because we were against the emergency manager law, and he wanted to come up and do stories about the emergency manager. And that's what he initially was focusing on, and kind of spiral into doing the FOIA requests and really writing about our water crisis. And you hear about Kurt Guyette, and you hear about Leanne Walters, who was the one that really, I tell her that she's the Harriet Tubman and Rosa Parks of this movement. Because it was, and that's Leanne right there. You just passed her.
Yeah, I know Leanne. I was just queuing her up.
Yeah. So like Leanne Walters, whose home was I would say the foundation of this fight, because of just like all of the work that her and Melissa did, as like far as like the being, like educating themselves on a lot of the science, and them being like very adversely affected by this. I'm probably missing, and then like the people like, and I say like there's the Flint folks, and then there's all of our allies like Kurt Guyette and Mark Edwards and Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha, and a lot of those folks that to really, I would say, validate, like they became the validation of what we were already saying. So they were able to do the FOIA requests and like look at a lot of the data and interpret it, even in opposition of what the messages and the narratives that were coming from the state of Michigan, the emergency manager, and the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality.
Those are heroes. Who are the villains?
Hopefully we can know some of I would say all three of the emergency managers, for one, are the villains. Ed Kurtz, Darnell Early, and Jerry Ambrose. I would call Dane Walling more of a collaborator because he could have spoke up and he didn't. And
well, he's a political animal. He's 41 years old. He's been a mayor for what, 6 years or something, and he had to walk a political tightrope to keep his position and keep things in tow. So he kind of, I know.
Well, as the
I guess if you defend the gangster life, you kind of are a gangster by association.
Well, I mean, just because you're an elected official doesn't mean that you can fight and use your position to raise awareness and to be in opposition of that. I mean, Eric Mays used his position to be in opposition of that. There have been Kermit Williams down in Pontiac has used his position under an emergency manager and to really like fight back. So there's been, I mean, people have done it under the emergency manager law, and Dane chose not to. So, and I will say Snyder, there's some people, the EPA, and some of these people we don't know because we didn't have the documents to really comb through and see. So Snyder last night at the State of the State address said that he was going to release his emails because he's under executive immunity, so people couldn't FOIA those communications. So hopefully we can get the full unfiltered communication so we can see. I mean, the community at least deserves like to know the names of the people who were in the room when those decisions were made, like who poisoned them, who sat back and said nothing.
He's not going back far enough. He's only going to release 2014, 2015. Shouldn't you think that we should see 2013 when the decision was made to disconnect from Detroit and go with the Flint water?
Yes, we should. And I know I actually found a document that was commissioned by the Treasury's office for Ed Kurtz. At that point in time, they weren't going to use the Flint River as the primary source because there were explorations and they chose not to. But I don't know, like if there was a meeting or discussions of why. Like that's a whole nother situation because it was it was originally 3 options: the city of continue to purchase the city of Detroit, but I think that was mainly used as justification to join the Kirigati Water Authority.
But the county is part of the KWA, and they chose to continue to receive their water from Detroit and not get it from the Flint River. And the city council at the time, we're talking 2013, city council wanted to also continue getting their water from Detroit because it was the cheapest option. And the emergency manager said, no, you're going to pull it from the river.
Yeah, you're going to pull it from the river, and all of these upgrades that had to occur for our to our water treatment plant, because at that point in time, you know, like for the past 50 years, the city of Flint was the backup system for Genesee County, and the Flint River was the backup system in case something happened with the the Detroit water treatment plant. So they were the emergency backup.
Well, I hear that there was a scrapper right behind the water plant, and a lot of the pipes were pulled out and sold for scrap. That's kind of an industry in Flint. When you have abandoned buildings, you got these scrappers that go in and pull all the pipes out. And I hear a lot of the infrastructure within the water plant was pulled out because it had been abandoned for quite some time.
Well,
Can you speak to that?
I can't really speak too much to that because so our water treatment plant, the newest one, the operational one, is from I will say about from the 1950s, and then there's parts of it that's from the 20s. But I'm not sure because I've never really had a chance to go through all of the plant, like all of the buildings there on that site to really see where, like what's operational and what's not.
They say that there are some pipes that are made of wood.
Well, that may be. I mean, that may be. I don't know.
You don't know. I'd like to see some wooden pipes, and I wonder how old they are. I'm sure they didn't put wooden pipes in the 50s. They probably put wooden pipes in what, the 1900s or something? I mean, we're going way, way back.
Yeah, maybe like the 1920s because with a lot of the old homes, I mean, it's kind of interesting with all the things that happened because I mean, there were a lot of wells in many parts of the city, and some parts once they made the decision to purchase water from Detroit, those wells were filled and they built water mains and like really like built out a lot of the infrastructure. So most of our stuff is dated, I would say probably from the 50s. Like when that contract was signed with Detroit. The original contract was signed with Detroit.
That was back in the 60s. Do you know the history of like 1963 when they had the scandal to build a pipeline from Lake Huron to Flint?
Yes.
Nobody's talking about it. Nobody in the media. The Flint Journal is mum about it. The Detroit Free Press, mum about it. It's like everybody knows about this story that lives in Flint and Detroit, but the national media, they haven't got a clue. They haven't got a clue the scandal back in 1963 and how this has just been ebbing for like 50 years.
Yeah, so the Flint Journal has always been a newspaper of the corporations and stuff. So there is a book called The Many and the Few about the sit-down strike in Flint. And it has like, like reprinted journal articles like during the sit-down strike. And they were really like for General Motors. So that's not anything new. Like they're not really like, they were never like a real champion of the people. Like that's not in the culture of the journal.
Well, they still aren't. They're not really divulging what they know about it through their archive articles. And they make it very difficult for you to go back any further than 2014. And that's where the national media picks up the timeline of this, 2014. That's it. They don't take you back to 2013. They don't take you back to 2010 or 2004 or 1963. And it's all in the archives of the Flint Journal. And they're not forthcoming with the full story. Maybe somebody's going to write a book. You're going to write a book on this? You sound pretty illiterate. You sound pretty literate here.
Oh, I don't know if I want to write a book about this. I think most of my commitment is to write a few essays about.
Well, in today's world, who's reading books?
Well, I still read books and I still buy books.
Oh yeah, you buy paper books, or are you in the digital world?
I do both. So, depending on most of my nonfiction books, I still buy physical copies, but a lot of my fiction books and my trashy novels, like I do that digitally.
So you're a heavy reader. What are you reading right now?
Well, I'm actually rereading because I read it like every year. Is like Dune by Frank Herbert.
Dune.
Yes, Dune. It's a sci-fi classic.
Right. It's a sci-fi classic. I remember reading it years ago.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, that's right. You're into superheroes, and on your Facebook page, you have yourself as a sorceress, don't you?
Yes, Sorceress Supreme, and
Sorceress Supreme.
it's an homage to Doctor Strange,
Oh,
which is a Marvel comic book hero.
okay. Well, let's get
You're
back.
like, okay.
Well, I just don't know where to go with that. I don't know what questions to ask in the Marvel world.
Yeah, but also I would say like the nonfiction book that I'm rereading is so there's a gentleman now, he is a professor at University of California, Irvine. His name is Andrew Highsmith. And he spent a period of time in Flint, and his book is called Demolition Means Progress. And it is really about like all of it, some of the things like what you're talking about, like all of the ins and outs, and like really research. He delved deep into like some of our local archives to really talk about urban renewal. And sorry, I'm getting like all these notifications on Facebook, but really talk about like urban renewal and how a lot of the power structures conspired to keep geographic racial segregation, and how they really like really worked and kind of played the system to like stop integration in Flint.
I hear a cry of genocide from the protesters. I hear the cry that they want to turn Flint into a college town. I hear the cry that they want to get rid of the North Side. Any truth to that?
Well, I'll unpack some of these like one by one. So there's this new, well, for me, I'm like, Flint has always been a college town, but they didn't market it as a college town. So University of Michigan, Flint has had a campus in Flint since the 50s. Kettering University, which used to be General Motors Institute, which was the training facility for General Motors for like I would say a lot of their administration and their engineers. So GM trained their own engineers, and they created an institution to do that. So that has been around since the 1920s. At Michigan State University now has a college in human medicine, like campus here, but they had externships into our area hospitals for, like quite a while. So I would say Flint has always been a college town. I don't think that that's a great thing, because like we've already experienced what a single industry town does with sorry, still notifications. What a single industry town has done, because we've been marketed as General Motors and we've been decimated by that. So I think that is like, it is not, is ill-advised for them to do that, because you're advertising yourself to what you really like. That's just a no. So Flint is also like very hyperly segregated. And so when we say the North Side now in this context is for Black people, like that's what it is. So in Flint, you can name a neighborhood and really talk about, like, without saying the racial and class makeup of that neighborhood or side of town. So the North Side, majority Black people, because that's how the population dispersed after after open housing, because the city of Flint was the first community in the nation to have open housing where anybody could live anywhere through a public vote. So there were other communities that did it, but they did it through their legislature, like through their city council passing an ordinance. But in the city of Flint, it was popular vote, and it only passed by like 53 votes. So there has been a whole lot of disinvestment on the north side, and some people even like use like, I mean, for many years, the Flint River, the Flint River has been used as a dividing line of like who lived where. So there are these fault lines, these historic fault lines in Flint, where it was just like up to a certain time, like you were allowed or welcome, you know, like in areas. So it's interesting now that we have some of our foundations who are now quote unquote making commitments to investing up there. And so I'm like, now you're trying to validate that after all this time. So you have a lot of people who are, I wouldn't say bitter, but they're just like, why you wait all this time to, and now like we're supposed to be grateful and like because now you're validating like our life experiences. So, and I mean, I used to live on the north side, and like there's like tons of divestment. Like there aren't a lot of, you know, like there are some, you know, like small businesses of people just kind of doing what they doing, but you don't really have a whole lot, and that kind of speaks to a lot of the other like larger issues. So like lack of lending, and you know, like all the other stuff that happens. So you have people who are creating like alternative economies, like through cooperatives or, you know, all this other stuff. So there's that. And genocide, for me is, I mean, I'm going to take a more nuanced thing. So, I mean, this lead came out of everybody's pipes. Like this lead water is coming out of everybody's pipes. And this is a way that I think it was really good and a really unique opportunity where you have, because like even like social movements, a lot of social movements are like very racialized and class oriented, and they're kind of segregated. But with this, you have, you know, it was multicultural, so you had Black people and white people, and like very like diverse. So you had younger people, you had older people, you had elders, and you had like different people, like you had retirees, people working full time, you had students. So it was like a very kind of like you, and I mean kind of like a unicorn moment, like for our social movement. So, but the application of the emergency management law is racialized, and it is and over 50% of the African American population in Michigan is under the emergency manager law. So even though in the city of Flint we do not necessarily have an emergency manager, we are still under the emergency manager law. So that is very racialized, and even though we're a poor community, we still have a lot of assets, mainly our water treatment plant. So that's still a lot of power and control over this area. So this is a way to, and this is my conspiracy theory coming out again. So I'm gonna do my little rant. So it's very interesting how before 2014, we had the Detroit Water and Sewer Department that was providing water, you know, like throughout the region. And through the actions of Flint's emergency manager, it ended up destabilizing the Detroit Water and Sewer Department. So that was used as justification as Detroit was going through the bankruptcy. later on that year, and really used their justification as that department became regionalized and kind of pushed into the Great Lakes Water Authority. Like that was the fact that City of Flint, which was the largest customer for the Detroit Water Sewer Department, it jacked up the rates for the Detroit for the customers under the Great Lakes Water Authority. And so on a separate track, you have the City of Flint, who used to sell the water to the rest of the county, has now and was the backup source. So they received $1 million a year to serve as the backup source for Genesee County. Now you have that power diminished under the Kirigati Water Authority, because before you had, total control, and now the Flint's voice is going to be muted with that. And you compound that now in Genesee County, we have urban living, we have kind of suburban living, that a lot of it kind of sprawled out after, like in the 60s, in the late 60s, early 70s. And then you have rural. So you have in northern Genesee County, like Richfield Township, Davidson Township, you have fracking companies going door to door asking homeowners if they want to if they want to sell their mineral rights. So like when fracking is, like when they actually start, they haven't quite started yet. They're kind of paving the way to start up there. You have a lot of these suburban communities that were built before, that the homes were placed before there was infrastructure. So they have wells. So once fracking starts up there, the wells are going to run dry. And so they're going to have to join the Kirigati Water Authority as customers, because their wells are going to run dry and or become polluted, like through the fracking process.
So this could get to fracking. They've got a city that was built for 200,000 people. Now 100,000 people live in it. They need to move all those people into a section so that that land can be used for other purposes, such as fracking or growing clover. I know they got a large lump of money from the government for blight over the next couple of years. They're going to bulldoze down all these neighborhoods and turn them into fields of clover for the time being. So those fields of clover could, in a sense, become future fracking fields. Am I off base here?
I'm not sure if fracking is going to actually be in Flint, but it's definitely going to impact the Kirigati Water Authority, because that's a regionalized authority. It's not just it's 5 counties. Like that's going to potentially service 5 counties. And when you have, like I grew up in the suburbs, and so we had well water. And we didn't have water mains coming down our street delivering water. We had well water because our subdivision was built like in the early 70s. So you have like a lot of these people who never paid for water in their life. They had water softeners and was pumping their water. And so now you're going to have like added expense for the people. Like, I don't know if it's gonna spur like people moving into the exurbs, but you're gonna have a lot of people who do not live in Flint, but who are now part of this water authority, who's going to be impacted by the actions of fracking. Because I know, like I know specifically like in Davison, which is an outer ring suburb of Flint, like their council was notified, because they brought in Michigan State University, which is our land grant university here in Michigan. They brought them in to really talk about fracking and the implications, as people were going door to door from the companies like buying mineral rights, like for some of the farms and the homes out there.
We lost our viewership. We had people watching us, and then when we started talking about fracking, they all disappeared.
Oh, they all left. They were like, "Oh, we don't want to hear that." But
we don't. We want to just hear about polluted water. We don't want to hear about blight and fracking.
Well, it's but it's all connected, because you have to make those connections, because like as we were talking about, like people want to. I mean, a lot of people are interested in Flint because it's right now it's a human interest story, but they don't necessarily want to talk about like some of the larger global implications. But we have to make sure to make those connections.